Hi folks, thanks so kindly for joining us. My name is Cara, welcome to Green Apple Books. I'm excited to have you folks here. Please do, this is the perfect time to get a refreshment. If you have not already, I would highly encourage you to imbibe in seltzer or something harder if you choose. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us tonight for our event with Steve Turner, celebrating his book Mud Ride. Let's give a hand for Steve.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I will keep it very brief on Steve's behalf, but I'm really glad to have you folks here. Now's a good time to silence your cell phones. If you haven't already, I'll let you know that the restroom is behind us. It's available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome this man here, whom you all know. Steve is visiting us from Portland today. He's the guitarist and co-founder of the seminal Seattle grunge band Mudhoney, and tonight we are celebrating his book, Mud Ride, A Messy Trip Through the Grunge Explosion. Let's give one more hand for Steve Turner.
All right. So I got this book. It was kind of a pandemic project. I hadn't planned on writing a book, but a friend from Seattle, Adam Tepedalin, who used to be the editor of a Seattle magazine called The Rocket, got a hold of me and, offered his assistance to do a book because he thought it would be something of interest. And I thought about it. I was kind of like, I don't know, and thought about it a little bit and like, well, if I was going to do it, I wanted to talk a whole lot about what happened in Seattle before the big explosion that most people know of as the grunge thing. The whole 80s punk rock world that pretty much all of us that were in the bigger grunge bands came out of. It didn't just, happen. And so I wanted to talk about that a lot. And I also wanted to talk about my later years, if you will, after the explosion died down, and how you keep trying to be an artist as you get older and you have other obligations and expenses and kids and jobs and things like that, and how do you keep trying to keep that creative spark going as you get older. So we kind of organized it into 3 parts. Everything that happened before, oh god, Lavella's here.
You know it, baby.
Everything that happened before Mudhoney started, the glory years, if you will, the 90s, and then whatever happened after that, which, I have a great life. I've got grown kids that live with me still, all that kind of stuff. I love doing what I do, but, it's a journey, and, you don't always know what's coming next. And there were some wild times. The pandemic sucked. I think it sucked for everybody, but for touring musicians, man, it was hard, because I didn't really have a backup at that point. So it was like, I borrowed some money from Stone, basically. Not gonna lie. He got me through the pandemic. But so we got the book organized and got a deal with Chronicle Prism, which is amazing, and that's why I'm here. And I'm going to read a little bit about my discovery of punk rock, because to me that is the beginning of the whole thing with Seattle. It's all about punk rock. There's skateboarding first, and then punk rock, and then grunge. That's how it goes in the order. So I'll read a little bit, and then we can hash out the details and argue about stuff. I started taking folk guitar lessons as an elective in 9th grade in 1979, but I wouldn't pinpoint this as the start of my musical career. In fact, I'd never considered the thought of playing music as a career, even when I got into serious bands later on. I wasn't one of those kids standing in front of a mirror holding a tennis racket imagining I was on stage in a coliseum or at a giant festival. Punk rock would have never crossed my radar were it not for those early skateboarding magazines. We skateboarders were led to it. Skateboarder covered punk bands because some of the pros were getting into them. Steve Olson, the guy, the number one guy, was at my reading last night, which is pretty exciting. I hadn't seen him for a number of years, but it's his fault. Pros were getting into them, so we all came along for the ride. It was a whole new world. There was also a certain amount of serendipity that the late 70s and early 80s skateboarding scene erupted out of Southern California, because it had a direct connection to that area's emerging hardcore punk scene. Bands like TSOL played hardcore and skated. TSOL's first 12-inch EP for Posh Boy Records in 1981 is still one of my favorite records. Even the bands that weren't necessarily known as skaters, like Black Flag, became inadvertent ambassadors to the skateboarding hardcore connection because skaters loved the raw rebelliousness of their music. For teenagers like me who were alienated from the social scene at their junior high or high school, this is how we found our people. Geographically, Seattle had always been at a disadvantage when it came to attracting touring bands. San Francisco, some 800 miles to the south, we're here, was the next closest large market. So unless you were a band with a big guaranteed paycheck waiting you in the Emerald City, you might skip it. That's not to say that touring bands never found their way to Seattle, but for most that weren't West Coast based already, it was a significant schlep to Western Washington from almost anywhere in the country. The burgeoning West Coast hardcore scene from Vancouver, BC down to Los Angeles, I should have included San Diego. But I can't think of any hardcore bands from San Diego.
Battalion of Snakes.
Ah, crap, you're right. Yeah, they were great. Operated on a completely different scale, touring in vans or cars, towing U-Haul trailers, and playing any venue that would have them. These bands would play squats, basements, universities, clubs, dives, whoever would pay them enough to get gas money to the next town. They'd sell whatever merch they had, a 7-inch or album, maybe some t-shirts, to get enough for food and maybe get some cheap beer. This was the life that Hermosa Beach hardcore quartet Black Flag were living when they rolled into town on May 2nd, 1980, to play at the Washington Hall on Capitol Hill. Also on the bill, Canada's Subhumans and local punks, The Vanes. The Vanes had a very young Duff McKagan on drums. I think he was 14 at the time. I desperately wanted to go to this show, my first concert of any description, but my parents didn't think sending their 15-year-old son into Seattle at night was a great idea. They had no idea what punk or hardcore was, so that didn't figure into the equation, but they probably sensed that it wasn't exactly going to be an evening of wholesome family entertainment. As it turned out, their intuition was spot on. What happened that night is renowned in Seattle punk lore as the Black Flag Riot Show. According to two friends who were at the show, cowering behind an overturned table with Black Flag's drummer, Robo, the giant brawl was apparently instigated by some Vancouverites who'd come down to hear the bands. Police were called, arrests were made, and the whole scene ended up on the front page of the local newspapers. My mom felt vindicated for not letting me go. 3 months later, just before I was to start attending Mercer on High as a sophomore, I finally had my chance to see Devo. They were supporting their Freedom of Choice album, which would soon spawn the top 40 hit Whip It. Devo had a lot of cachet in the skateboarding world because of their Freedom of Choice video, which featured some notable pro skaters of the day like Steve Olson, Jay Smith, and Eddie El Gato Elguera, skating in an empty pool while Devo played in matching Rector knee pads and elbow pads, which were skateboard pads. So when I saw they were playing at the Showbox in downtown Seattle, my friends and I knew we had to go. Despite the glamorous name, the Showbox was a jazz-era club whose luster had faded by the 80s. It was in a fairly sketchy part of First Avenue, across from the Pike Place Market, so getting my parents' permission required some finesse. A few of my skateboarding friends were already planning to stay at my place that same weekend so we could compete in a downhill contest in nearby Bellevue. Luckily, there was an early show. Devo played 2 shows that night. And my parents figured that the whole safety in numbers thing would be justification enough to allow us to go see Devo together after the contest. Among my motley crew were Mike, Micro Shaughnessy, Mark, Pee-wee Healy, apt nickname since we were all small. They were trying to call me Swivelneck at that time. The nickname, thankfully, did not stick. And David Griggs. David was the best skater in the area at the time, and the future bassist for 10 Minute Warning, who were hugely influential in Seattle. David showed up at my house while we were having breakfast, and my mom graciously invited him to join us at the table. "Would you like some pancakes, David?" she asked. He was wearing a dirty old overcoat and was carrying his skateboard, which was a pile of junk. Oh no, thank you, Mrs. Turner, he demurred. It seemed strange to me that someone who looked vaguely homeless would turn down a Leave It to Beaver-style breakfast. Then he added, I brought my own breakfast, and he produced a couple of dirty carrots and a head of broccoli from inside his grubby overcoat. He is now a world-renowned yoga instructor. Travels all over the world doing Ashtanga yoga. Still one of the greatest skaters. So on August 12th, 1980, decked out in Bermuda shorts and Rector knee pads and clutching my skateboard, I witnessed my first punk rock show. It was my introduction to what I saw as a cool, weird, and kind of dangerous scene. Obviously, not every show erupted into a riot, but punk definitely attracted a sketchy element and was typically performed in shitty, downscale venues. After dipping my toes in the punk rock waters at the Devo show with no obvious physical damage, no brawls at that one, my parents decided that it'd be okay for me to finally see Black Flag at the same venue 4 nights later. This was predicated on the attendance of my older skateboarding neighbors, John Lee and Mike Judge. My mom trusted John completely because he was a neighbor and older, and she knew him well. If I was with John and Mike, I could go anywhere. John's stepdad owned a killer late 60s convertible, big and white with a red interior, and John was allowed to drive it to shows in Seattle. Between the big front and back bench seats, we could easily fit 6 kids in the car. My skateboarder friends and I piled in and went to see Black Flag, with fingers crossed that there wouldn't be a repeat of the band's last show in town. More so than the Devo concert, my first Black Flag gig was a revelation. I was both afraid and intrigued. Afraid because the scene seemed scary and dangerous, and intrigued because the members of opening band Soldier were basically my age at the time. They were kids. Soldier's MO was to play as fast as possible. They were a little rougher and more northwest than the Southern California hardcore of the day. I think of all the punk rock from those days in Seattle as being moss-covered, damper and darker and uglier. The scariest bands I've seen in my life were all from Seattle. Paul Soldier would go on to another influential Seattle band, 10 Minute Warning, with David Griggs, but seeing him and his band opening for Black Flag was a huge eye-opener. These were kids my age. I was like, shit, kids have bands? And then I played guitar, probably 30 minutes later.
That was beautiful.
I've been told by a good friend of mine, Jonathan Evison, this novelist guy from Seattle, to never read more than 10 minutes. He says 8 minutes tops. That's the perfect point. And I take him at his word. Not that I've timed that, but so people have questions or things to yell at me. Lavella?
My only thing, Steve, honestly, I loved it. I loved the first part. That's why I didn't know, I don't know much about you before you were 18.
Right.
We're the same age, so it's amazing. One of my first shows was Devo, et cetera, et cetera. And it was amazing. The middle part, when I met you your first time in London, you played
Sure.
of course.
Yeah.
At the Fillmore, opening for Sonic Youth. We've been friends it'll be 35 years this year. Wow. The middle part was great. A lot I knew, but I was learning a lot. The end is my only, I wish there was more about Vanishing Point. I wish there was more about Since We Become Translucent. I love those records. The thing about Mudhoney is you've never sucked. Never. Every record is good. And I don't like this. There's kind of a thing like they were great and then there's just and then they're great again. But you were never bad.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to know a little more about what was going on at that time, those records. That's it. But I realize it's a book. You can't put everything in there.
Yeah, there was a time constraint, I think.
For sure.
Chronicle wouldn't let me talk about it all, man.
Oh, really? they were like, this Vanishing Point chapter has to go.
Yeah.
No, but that's otherwise, I mean, just as a fan, there's even more I would have liked to know.
Sure, yeah.
That,
But,
it left me wanting more, which is what
that's good.
Good
Yeah.
show does. Good music does. Good show does.
My point of view, I guess, was it wasn't necessarily a book just about Mudhoney. And I could talk for days about those records because I think they're flawed a little bit. And there was a learning curve once we got Guy in the band and things like that. And we were, we were finding our footing, I guess, and we don't play those songs live.
Yeah.
And that's what we've noticed. Like, wow, we don't play any songs from a couple of these records live anymore, which is kind of strange because I think there's some great stuff on it. But some of the best stuff to me on those records, like Baby Can You Dig the Light, I love that song. That's why we put it first on the record. But I don't think we can ever play that song again, because that was just made up on the spot, kind of. And we would have to have someone teach us that song.
Well, I've seen the grown-ups. I understand that they're on this one.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. My sister had 6 kids, right? And they're all reading the book right now. And so I'm getting a lot of texts from all of them. And my niece Gina, who is wonderful, but she converted to Mormonism before she got married. And so she's all excited about the Thrown Ups, which makes me kind of uncomfortable. He's like, I didn't know anything about it. I'm like, yeah, don't. Don't go there. I can just keep talking with Lavella if you want. Okay.
I'm kind of curious because you.
Hi.
I'm kind of curious because about I haven't read the whole book yet. I'm sorry about that, but I will get to it. And what the and I'm sure you write about this, but what it must have as a musician who's been working there for all those years. And then when it started to flip and, went from being the city that everyone skipped to the cover of Time magazine, was that a huge shock and surprise? Did it happen gradually? Did it feel like overnight when you were in it? What was that all about?
It wasn't overnight. Mudhoney started in early '88, right? And we had instant underground success. We did not pay any dues. We weren't struggling. As soon as we said we were a band, we had 2 labels saying they put out our records. So, we kind of got going in '88, and Sonic Youth kind of took us under their wing immediately, and that's how we came down here in the fall of '88, opening for Sonic Youth with Das Damen as well. No, Die Kreuzen. Our first show was with Das Damen. But, so then we went to Europe in 1989, and we're doing pretty well and getting on covers of magazines and stuff. And so we were doing great. We were kind of arcing like this, and Nirvana and Tad and whatnot were still struggling to find their place in that thing, but they were getting some hype too. So when Nevermind came out, that was crazy. I mean, it just immediately hit big, and I think it was just the right song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, right time. The video was great, and it showed a completely different world, I think, to the kids that were watching it on MTV, because it wasn't a polished thing, even though it was a very professional video, but it still showed they didn't look like rock stars. They looked like just kind of dirtbags, losers, if you will. And, I think that was really intriguing to people, obviously, and it just exploded. So, that was great. And then, a few months later, Pearl Jam's 10 kind of exploded too. So these were all friends of ours, and we were doing fine. So I was just excited for all of my buddies, and I was like, this is great. This is a crazy thing that's happening. And then it just kept getting crazier and crazier. And we were kind of still just doing our thing. We didn't, we weren't upset with anything. We were just happy for our friends, and we just kept doing what we did. We kept going on tour and putting out records. We signed to a major label, but there wasn't a lot of fanfare there. We kept it on the down low, sort of, because we knew what young bands, there's a lot of mistakes young bands do. And sometimes they get into a bidding war with major labels, and they go for the upfront money without realizing that's actually money that they will have to pay back eventually if they take it, one way or another, And so we didn't do that. We were pretty smart and wise to the ways of the world, and we just kept doing our thing. And, obviously things took a turn for the worse with Kurt killing himself and things like that. And that, to me, historically, that was kind of the end of the good times. And then the last half of the 90s was kind of weird. And, I always point out that the next 2 hit songs out of Seattle were kind of sunshiny, happy pop songs from the presidents of the United States of America and Harvey Danger. Because I think people get over the doom and gloom, and so was I. You know, I don't blame them. But we just kept doing our thing.
When you say things got crazy, I mean, how did that manifest? Like the size of the shows, like the media attention.
It didn't do much. Like we had to do really stupid interviews for MTV and things like that.
Okay.
And you know, there was just dumb things like going bowling with Ron Reagan Jr. And I had a great time. I blindsided them. You know, we were bowling, so that means a lot of beer involved, right? And I guess went up to him like, "Do you know how many songs there are from punk rock about your dad?" And I started just listing off all these like old hardcore songs about his dad. He's like, "Okay," he was trying to get away from me. But yeah, I mean, Tabitha Soren like blindsided us on the roof of a building about just drugs. I'm like, I've never taken drugs. You know, I don't know about drugs. You know, and it was like it just got stupid, and so then we kind of pulled back a little bit too. And Pearl Jam famously just stopped doing interviews completely at that point too, and I think that was a good move for them. But yeah, I would watch my buddies in that band, and I was so glad I wasn't in that band. I didn't want that hassle. I mean, I liked going to the grocery store, and they could not go to the grocery store in those years. So, I didn't want that. I wanted one paycheck like that. I would have taken one paycheck.
So, can I just throw something out?
Sure.
So, I think in 91 or 92, you guys played the Warfield. You guys, let me see, Eugenius, before they made him change his name to Captain America, opened up. So, me and my buddy, we drove from San Jose to San Francisco. We had dropped acid, and we're walking down Market. There's a strip club that was just blasting out Beastie Boys. And by that time, the acid was already hitting. So we went to find our seats, and
in the strip club?
No, at the Warfield.
Just checking.
Yeah. So we went to go sit down instead of being, in the melee of all these people and stuff. Your song Dead Love. So this is my memory of it. That real psychedelic, part that happens in Dead Love. You guys really extended that song, and you were extending that song for quite a while and stuff. Like on your album, it's just very compact, but you guys really opened it up. I saw fishes floating. Lucan looked like he was wearing. He reminded me of John Belushi because of the striped shirt.
Fair enough.
But you guys just. It's a memory that's imprinted in me. It was a beautiful, beautiful show. It was really great.
I think we were probably extending it because we were in San Francisco.
Okay.
Just going for the deadhead kind of thing.
All right. Yeah. So when we left, passed by the strip club, they're still blasting Beastie Boys, and
we weren't in the strip club.
No, I know. So I actually caught. I was 20 years old. I caught you guys over at the Ritz, I think it was last year or the year before in San Jose, and there was hardly any people in there.
That's got to be longer ago than that. Wasn't that before the pandemic? Or no?
I don't remember. It could have been.
Well, because the last time we were in California, we were with the Meat Puppets, and we played the American Music Hall here for a couple of nights. But yeah. I think it's been a while since we were in San Jose.
Yeah, no, it was. I do remember that show. Yeah. I just remember it being very, very like not a lot of people. I was just like, oh my God, this is beautiful. And yeah, I had dropped acid, and I was sitting. I was actually just standing there, right there in front of you, like you were just playing right there, and it was a great show. Great show. Cool. So I just want to say, I love your music, man. I love the way you play. It's always been something that's yeah, it's part of me. It's in my DNA. Yeah. Big Muff was just something that completely changed me. along, I was already listening to Sonic Youth, but when Big Muff came out, it was just, and I still have my tape.
Yeah.
The Sub Pop tape, it's black, and, I still play it every now and then. Yeah.
What do you play it on?
A cassette, thing, stereo.
I don't have one of those.
Well, I do collect a lot of shit, so.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
So peace to you. I love you, man. You're
Right
great.
on. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Are you on acid right now?
Yeah. I'm with my girls.
They are.
That's, the acid thing is just one of those things that, like, every once in a while, it's just a fun little thing to do.
See, I've never done it.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I was a straight edge kid.
That's beautiful.
I'm drinking wine at the moment,
Oh, nice.
but that's as far as I went. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you for what you do.
Sure thing.
So there's a part in the documentary Hype where Jonathan Perlman is on the roof, I think, of the Seattle building, and they turn around and they point the camera at some skyscrapers, and they say, "These wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our record label." Is that true, or was
No.
there something else going on?
That's just Poneman being funny.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really good at hyping things up and saying ridiculous things that intrigued people and pissed off some other people.
Yeah. That's cool.
Got a question from our online audience.
Oh gosh. Okay.
I know you mentioned Devo, Black Flag, and one of Duff's early bands. What else were you listening to / are in your formative years, maybe quote? Are there any bands that maybe weren't as publicized at the time that you feel like people should know about?
Well, I was getting into all the more commercial punk rock bands, if you will, but a lot of those names are forgotten at this point. Stiff Little Fingers were one of my favorite bands. The Clash, of course. I got into a lot of the Southern California hardcore, like kind of more melodic stuff, like Adolescence and Social Distortion, Agent Orange, a lot of that stuff. And 1981, going into 82, was all about the East Coast and Midwest hardcore. So you had Necros and Minor Threat and things like that, like SSD Control, like a lot of straight edge stuff. Void was a huge one when they popped up. They just absolute noise. And so my kids are, my kids like a lot of weird stuff. And they can't shock me with any of it because I've listened to like such crappy music through much of my life. That's not any worse than anything else I've heard.
I got another question. Did you have any history with the Wipers?
I saw the Wipers.
You saw them.
Yeah, I saw them.
How old were you? I'm sorry.
I think first time I saw them was 1984.
Okay.
So I would have been 19.
Wow.
I was aware of them already.
Okay.
Because they had a couple records out already and a couple singles. I had all those records. They were great. Dude was weird.
Was he?
He got Greg Sage. Yeah.
Okay.
They were a weird band. The best time I ever saw the Wipers was 1986, I think. And the U-Men opened for them. And U-Men were a Seattle band that was great.
Yeah.
And they opened for them up in Bellingham, and a bunch of us drove up there and watched it. And I feel like they almost played for 3 hours.
Wow.
It was just an absolute onslaught of the Wipers. And it was just this one kind of beat, because a lot of their songs are very similar. And just this intense thing. It's just, they didn't stop. They just get, you're like, how long are they going to play? Because punk bands usually play 30 minutes or something, and they just kept going. It was definitely 2 hours.
Okay.
But it was epic. Yeah.
Beautiful. They're do you remember how, you when you record something, it's completely different from like, a lot of those bands are very different from like what they do live. And how intense were they?
Well, Greg Sage was a great audio engineer. Okay. And he kept control live as well. But he had like all these old vintage Ampeg amps behind him. Like the blue Tolex ones from the 60s. And they were just stacked up like a thrift store, kind of. And then he had made his own sort of Echoplex kind of device. And because the song "Youth of America," where it gets all backwards and crazy. Yeah, it's a tape echo thing. I don't know much about these things, but he was in charge of his sound.
All right.
Completely, and it was always great. But he kind of subjugated the rhythm section way behind him.
Okay.
it was the Greg Sage show, pretty much.
Nice. Cool. Well, thank you.
Follow-up question, did you ever see Stiff Little Fingers?
I never saw Stiff Little Fingers.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And at one point when we were in England, I think we were first signed to Warner Brothers, so that would be 1992. Me and Mark were over there. I think just the two of us were flown over there to do interviews for a piece of cake. And Mark, who was never a huge Stiff Little Fingers fan, was interviewed by their guitar player. Like we went our separate ways, and we were doing separate interviews that day. And we got back together. He's like, yeah, I can't remember his name, the lead guitar player.
Well, it's not Jake. Not
Jake, the other guy. But he's like, yeah, George, whatever his name was, interviewed me. I was like, what? You don't even like Stiff Little Fingers. I would have been stoked to be talking to that guy. Yeah. Stiff Little Fingers is still going. But it's just Jake and...
What else are they going to do?
Yeah, or he...
Bruce Foxton was in that band.
He was in there for a while, which I would have liked to have seen that.
Me too. I should have went.
Yeah.
Not like they didn't play Slims 30 times.
Right.
Yeah, while he was in it. Oh well. But I never miss my money.
That's true. Do you have more?
Yeah. Another question from our online audience.
All right.
I'm a sage. If you, were there any books music memoirs or other books or any other kind of texts that you read in the making of this that were useful to you?
I read a lot of music books. I'm kind of one of those guys. The book I kept going back to when I was doing this book was Please Kill Me, which is a oral history of the New York music scene of basically the 70s. And what I loved about that book, it's expertly edited, and no one agrees on anything. Everyone just contradicts each other nonstop to that book. So that gave me the strength to stop fact checking on this book. I was like, at first I was like, talking to Dan, our drummer, a lot because he has the best memory in the band. I was like, is this kind of how it happened? And he's like, no, set me straight. And then at a certain point, I was like, you know what? This is my memory. This is my memoir. Dang it. I'm going to just go with it and let them argue it. Let other people argue about the little minor details about it. So that one was a big one, but I read that years ago. I just read the Kid Congo Powers documentary, which is freaking awesome. And because he's such a cool guy. And that book is really good. And I wish mine was as good as that book.
I have a question. What do you, when you look back on your early touring time, what do you miss and love, and what are you glad that you don't have to experience anymore?
Well, the first tours are just chaotic, and we were sleeping on people's floors and things like that, but that's kind of part of the fun. I do not want to sleep on people's floors anymore. I would be unhappy if that was the case, and I would stop touring. But that was part of the journey through it, because the chaos of being young and just going for it, and just getting in a crappy van and driving around. And we brought a friend with us, Bob Whitaker, who had no reason to be on tour with us except that he was really good at meeting people. So we figured he could talk to people while we were playing and figure out a place that we could stay. And he did well. Because none of us were going to do that. But he was really good at that. So, he eventually became our manager.
Nice.
But yeah, I don't miss those days. It was a journey. I like staying in nice hotels and stuff. I'm staying in a lovely hotel tonight.
Yes.
Which one?
What's it called? hang on. I'm going to find it because it's really nice. It's a historical landmark kind of place. It's kind of cool. Hang on. I'm gonna look this up because it's important. The Stannion Park Hotel. Yeah. It's not bad.
Isn't that up by H Street?
Yes.
It's right at Hayes Street. Yeah.
It's on a corner, right?
And there's like right across the street is the little street skate park.
Yeah.
And today is Go Skateboarding Day. So there is a crap ton of kids skating there,
Oh, nice.
which is always cool.
Okay, cool.
They might have been smoking weed as well. All of them.
Cheers.
More?
Mhm.
I can start signing books if you guys got books to sign. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for showing up. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Maybe one more hand for Steve Turner.
Yay.
Should I sit here?